I'd like to call to order the September 25th Board of Education regular meeting. I'd like to start with the Pledge of Allegiance, and Carrie Ann, would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance? To the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, great. Okay, I'd like to call our student representative, Fanny Zhang, up to give her report. Thank you for being here.
Hi. Okay, so starting off with academics, Ossining High School District launches the Saturday Learn and Explore program. Ossining High School senior Pujita Sunder is a National Merit semifinalist. Ossining High School had its back-to-school night on September 12th, while AMD, Park School, Claremont, and Roosevelt schools had their back-to-school night starting last week and will follow into this week as well. Yesterday, OHS had their grade 12 parent night where they discussed financial aid process. Within the arts, Ossining High School had its first Gimme the Mic courtyard concert of the year. And for sports, fall sports have been thriving with girls varsity tennis and volleyball both undefeated. And then on September 4th, Ossining Matters had their 5K run. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Okay. And we're going to have Greg Galiff read our prouds.
All right. So there's some work on the first one, so we can be proud, or show how proud we are. The News 12 School Spirit Showdown is back, so that's an online click. You can vote every 20 minutes this year. So during this meeting, you can get in a bunch of votes. There's a ribbon cutting for the new outdoor library taking place this Friday at 4 p.m. at Park School. And there's a hike at T-Town taking place on Sunday the 6th at 11 a.m. Is that with our superintendent? That wasn't noted. That's with the superintendent. We are proud.
Probably
Thank
right.
you.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, and now we're going to move into our work session, and our first presentation is facilities.
All right, good evening, everybody. Tonight is a conversation regarding facilities, and I want to thank the members of the facilities subcommittee that have been engaged in this conversation over the past few years. I want to also recognize our architects from Clark Patterson that are here as well that can answer any direct questions regarding the facilities at any time. But as a reminder, in the 3-year plan, one of the goals that we have is to create a multi-year plan regarding facilities. And so there's been, for the past few years, a variety of discussions regarding what our needs are across the district. And this begins to show some of the ideas that have been brought forth to discuss and to recommend in the current and into the future for the Ossining School District. So just to highlight a few things, I think it's important when we think about variables that we start to highlight what some of those are when we think about facilities. First is that of enrollment. We need to consider the number of students that we anticipate or we have in our school district, and as we start to look forward into the future and what that really means in terms of enrollment trends. And in this presentation, you're going to actually see one slide that from our demographers last year, or report from last year, a reminder that in November she'll be returning to give us more updated information regarding our enrollment. The other piece is looking at programming. What are our current programs? What are we offering in our school district? And what might we want to be offering in the future? As we start thinking about the students and the way in which they learn and the type of instruction we want to provide, we want to make sure that the program supports the type of, or the space supports the type of programs that we're seeking to offer. The other is the function and the ways in which the space supports the instructional program. Great example is one we often bring up is that of like our piano class. We had our Sue Kafer come up and speak about the program and how great and the number of students that are participating in it. But the question is, does the space support the piano program as best it can? And last one, but not least, is the cost of construction. Obviously, there's going to be a list of needs that we're going to want to address, but certainly we have to, in the context of our budget, consider how we're going to maintain our interest in being fiscally responsible to our community. This is just some quick research, and there's a lot of variables regarding this, but most importantly is that space does have an impact on achievement. First one speaks to actually the impact on suspensions. Space matters, in other words. It does contribute to a child's achievement and something that we should be considering as we go forth. And I think we do consider that and have been considering it in the year-to-year budgets. This is our enrollment. This is what our demographer presented last November/October. You can see that over the course of the years, we see an increase in in the number of students, but then she calls for a slight decrease in the last number of years of approximately 149 students. I would call that more so a plateau than anything else. The other aspect of this that we need to, a little caveat, is this does not include the projects that are currently being considered by the town, the village, and/or Briarcliff. So we know that there are projects that are being considered, large projects, and so this could certainly change the enrollment trends for the future. And this is just K-12 as a reminder. This is again just the impacts, the facility conditions, air quality is important, the temperature of our classrooms and the conditions of the setting, the facility design, and then how we're utilizing it. Considering crowding, is that an aspect, that number of students that we have in our schools and the hallways? Community access might be something that we need to consider as well. And then finally, in many ways, the 20th century classrooms are being used in a 21st century way. You can see some of the photos in the past and how some of these same spaces are being repurposed for the types of instruction that we want to see and use differently across the board. So I'm going to start off with Park School, and at the end we'll field any questions that the Board of Education and the community may have. So the first is cafeteria space. We realize that our cafeterias, and you can think about just the number of students that we can serve, and it does impact when we serve and when we end our lunch periods. And so the recommendation here, one of the aspects that we want to look at, is expanding the cafeteria at Park School, increasing and improving the servery as well along with it. This would entail taking one of the classrooms right next to the cafeteria. If you see at the bottom of the photo, you can see where one of the expansion recommendation is to gain 940 square feet to make the cafeteria larger for the number of students that we have there. So when we think about the context of the entire building, keeping in mind that we've just taken one classroom plus the need for additional space for a variety of other needs. So one of the things that we're looking at, or areas we're looking at, is ways in which to gain or build more classrooms. And so this 4 classroom addition is right above the last, our most recent addition. So it would be a call for a hallway leading up to the 4 classrooms that would be provided for general instruction. So moving on to Brookside School. There's a need for space at Brookside School. We've often talked about it, keeping in mind that even in the current conditions, that our library is half the space that it used to be, because we've taken it to absorb or to create classroom space. So one of the recommendations here is to look at gaining space and also the function and how students move from one section to the other. So you can see a hallway that connects basically where the existing library is to this 4-room addition. So it would provide for more space within the context of Brookside School, necessary space at the same time. The other is expanding a gymnasium. Gym space is of need across the district and in our community. So this is a 2,500 square foot addition to Brookside School's existing gymnasium space. And then lastly, cafeteria space as well, is expanding the existing cafeteria. Again, we face the similar challenges in all our buildings regarding the number of students that we're trying to serve and the space that currently exists. So this would be an expansion of the existing cafeteria by 1,200 square feet. So moving on to Claremont School. Keeping in mind that in our last year's budget, we have a recommendation to add additional classroom space that has been submitted or soon to be submitted? Just to clarify.
So the preliminary submission has been sent up to SED.
Okay.
Anytime we do a classroom addition, we have to go through the process of getting a pre-approval before we can submit construction documents. So that is at SED currently.
Great.
We're expecting that pre-approval will be green-lighted soon.
Great, thank you. So with that in mind, again, cafeteria space is another area that we want to address, specifically related to the servery. The number of students that we have in the small servery that exists at Claremont School impacts the amount of time students have to eat lunch. So we're trying to expand that so students can come in and out much quicker. Also, it's better space for the existing cafeteria staff. So it would be an expansion of the existing servery line and renovating the cafeteria so that it best suits and meets the needs of the existing building. With that too, this small, I'm sorry it doesn't show on the screen, but there's a small little box right here that is actually just right around here. It's tinier than tiny. Where much of our music lessons take place, band lessons take place in a very small space. There's actually a lift in that classroom space as well. The idea is to give them dedicated music space where they best supports the program. So we'd be looking at taking and renovating, relocating into where currently those are general ed classrooms and utilizing them specifically for music education. Moving on to Roosevelt. So Roosevelt is a very tricky building for a variety of reasons. Just the way the building flows, where special areas take place. They're all in different spots of the building. Sometimes you have to go downstairs to the second floor and then go down some back classroom or back stairwells to lead to the back area where sometimes we have our specials. This is trying to address the fluidity of the building, but also providing the additional space that we have and dedicated space that we need for some of our special areas. As by providing space for our special areas, we gain classroom space. So for example, right now, one of the classrooms that we'd recommend building for art, in doing so, we would gain a classroom for general instruction and/or self-contained classrooms within the building. So this is an addition in the front, basically where the main entrance to the building is. Actually, we call it the front, but it's technically the back where the main parking lot is. It would provide for special education classrooms, art space, resource room space, security vestibule to make sure, obviously, we continue our focus on safety and security. And we tried to think about ways in which we can maintain green space, because this would basically take away a lot of that grassy area that exists in the front of the building. As such, one of the things that we talked about is potentially like a rooftop garden on top of that, and that's for further discussion as well. But this is probably one of the areas in which we can gain space for Roosevelt School. The middle school, looking to gain more space, in this case in the area of STEM and music education. This is in the back area where the gymnasium is. It's adding an addition which will provide additional space. One of the things that we're hearing primarily from our band and orchestra rooms is that the space, even though it was renovated some years ago that we created, is actually becoming too small for the number of students. It's actually both a good problem in that there's a lot that shows interest on behalf of our students, but it's presenting an issue as it relates to the amount of space and the quality of the space for the instruction that we want to provide. So this would call for an addition, but we also asked, let me just go to this one here. We asked our architects to look at other options to address the music space. This would call for basically an extension to the room, the band and orchestra room. So in this case, this would have to have further discussion. It's a 2,000 square foot addition. But you can see that there's costs associated with it, and I don't mean that in terms of just dollars, that it would mean taking away some parking spaces that currently exist. Yet, this would be another option for us to consider in trying to address the need for additional music space. So going back, I just want to add that one of the areas that we've carefully talked about within the context of the facilities subcommittee, and certainly want to have a broader conversation, is that both indoor and outdoor space matters. We need, there really isn't much other than blacktop at our middle school currently. And so we need to think about, this is just basically a clip art, so this needs to have further discussions, but it gives you a sense of how can we provide outdoor space that is more suitable for the adolescent learner, the types of individuals that have, whether it's quiet space but more active space, basically having options for our students at the middle school. So it's an area that needs further discussion, but also something that we want to consider in our facilities movement. And lastly is Ossining High School. So one real challenge right now is our weight room and fitness center as well. There is really no fitness center. The weight room is the weight room. And if you've been down to the weight room, while there's been steps to try to address the space, it's still, we would say that it needs a lot more steps to get it to where we want it to for the students and our athletic department. So one of the recommendations here, or one option to consider, is potentially renovating the existing weight room and taking one of the science classrooms and creating a fitness room. We want the option to be more than just the athletic teams, but actually opening it up for all students and potentially all staff to participate in utilizing this space. That's just one option, and there's another option down in a subsequent slide. Another one is expanding the guidance space. We want space for our guidance department to meet with our students. Right now, basically, the only space that we have for our guidance counselors to meet with children is in their set offices. So this would look to take one of the classrooms that are right next door and expanding it to provide some flexible space for our guidance department to meet with parents, to run some groups with students, and or just meet as a general department. It'll provide greater flexibility for the number of students that we have at Ossining High School. Another one is the cafeteria. While we've renovated the cafeteria for the number of students we know is still a challenge. And so one of the options that we've looked at is potentially expanding the cafeteria into this space. So basically taking down one of the walls and expanding it into where we sit currently and providing more space for our students. This would be a 5,300 square foot renovation. Our existing cafeteria and kitchen is about 6,130 square feet. But this would better provide some flexible space beyond just students being able to eat. It would provide some flexible space for students to conjugate, utilize it for studying, and various other options. The next piece is music. We know that the space that we have is very, very tight for the number of students that are participating in our music program. So the music concerns at the middle school mirror the concerns that we're seeing here at Ossining High School. So this would look to renovate that space that currently exists. It's basically, if you're facing Ossining High School from Route 9, it's to the right of the theater, and building out and providing additional space. So the new music space or expansion would be 5,100 square feet, providing a total of 6,500 square feet of renovated space as well. And then in turn, one of the other options that we consider in this is maintaining that space and possibly relocating our library so that this would become the cafeteria, and the other space where our current music space is becomes a media center. And then finally, returning back to the idea of the fitness center, one of the other options that we might want to consider is building a new fitness center about 6,550 square feet above the current locker rooms. So that would actually provide for access for individuals to look into some of the basketball games, into the basketball court, but also a much larger space, and actually probably more suitable in terms of sheer size for the number of students that we have. While the other is an option, it's still very small for the number of students that we have here at Ossining High School. So this would provide not only just weights, but also various other fitness equipment. But it would be right on top of the existing locker rooms. And the last we'll call, what we'll term it the student commons. And basically it's taking areas like the courtyard and various other open spaces and enclosing it. In doing so, what this would do is basically provide indoor space for our students, flexible indoor space for our students, where they can use to study, and or staff, I should say, everybody, where they can use for study, where they can go to eat lunch. This is basically very similar to that of what you see in various college and university settings as well. So it would provide, again, just flexible space for our students. The concerns here at Ossining High School with a closed campus is just the amount of square footage that we have and the spaces that our students can utilize. So this would provide options for them moving forward. And the last option is a new STEM lab, and this would actually take place, one of the places we can look at is below the gymnasium, the small gym, we'll term it, here at Ossining High School. Currently it's used for storage, but this would provide for better space for our robotics program. Currently they have a lot of equipment, and what we're looking for is some more like warehouse type space where it provides some flexibility, obviously providing it the equipment that it needs, but keeping in mind that where our robotics program is a science lab. And while they do incredible things, we want to look for a space that best provides and supports those type of programs, and this is one option we can consider. And the last we'll call a bridge, but basically, and we've heard this years ago and it continues to be of concern to many of our students and staff, is a bridge that connects third floor to third floor. So we're currently, to get from one part of the building to another, you actually have to go down a flight of stairs. If you're on the third floor, go down a flight of stairs to move to the newer part of the building, and then go up a flight of stairs to get to the third floor. So this would basically provide for greater connection and greater flow across the building as well. So those are options that we've discussed. Let me just share just generally what our next steps are. I would hope to provide the Board of Education with the entire Board of Education some recommendations at minimum for what we'd like to include in our capital line by November. So that would mean continue conversations with the facility subcommittee. The facility subcommittee has charged me to prioritize and make sure that we carefully look at and basically outline what those priorities are so that we can have further discussions with the Board of Education. The capital line, you may recall, involved a lot of discussion last year, and we want to take that portion of the budget process out of the fold while we continue to outline our plan and finalize some plans for multi-years. In addition to that, one of the pieces that we need to consider is obviously the finances associated with it and how we'll go about financing, not only with our budget, but also using capital reserves and various other funding sources that we have to fund the projects that we are outlining here and potentially others as we continue to have discussions moving forward. So those are generally our next steps. But at this point wanted to have a conversation obviously with this board and the members of our community as well.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Sanchez. I'd like to open it up to the board for any questions or comments. Aaron?
Yeah, just wanted to, brought this up a couple meetings ago. I wanted to bring it up again while we're talking about facilities. The idea of going green, putting solar panels on the schools. Number one, if we went green, I mean, it'd just be great for our footprint in general too. We'd save a ton of money on energy that we can then use for some of these projects. Three, we just talked about temperature in the classrooms and temperatures in the school. If you go green and we can have air conditioning in the schools and controlled climate in the schools, it actually makes the learning experience better. A lot of students have complained to me in the last month or so that it's too hot in their classrooms, that they're running around gym, running around recess, and then they can't focus after. We don't want to, take away their gym time or recess time. We want them to exercise and be active and then come back to a comfortable classroom setting. So my suggestion is that for November, we should look at this choice of solar panels and, take Ossining to the next step and go green.
So let me just respond, because I know you've brought it up numerous times, and philosophically, I'm not disagreeing with the need to potentially go green and look at various options. In a very near, in the not-so-distant future, I would say, in one of your updates, Lita has done some further discussions with some individuals that have done some preliminary look-throughs of our buildings. So we can share that with you. I'd like to bring it back to the facility subcommittee to have some discussions around it, but we have kind of followed up on some of the comments that have been shared here. I think one of the other pieces too associated with that is beyond just the facilities, but also, as we construct and look to build new spaces, one of the areas that we could be looking to do or consider is potentially making that, how much greener can we make those spaces, and how it might impact the rest of the entire building. If that makes sense.
Absolutely.
And also, I've just recently had a conversation with, last Friday with our town supervisor and our mayor around this topic as well, of basically what's going on in the town and the village relative to green energy, and how, what would it mean for us as a school district. More to come on that. And again, I know Alita has some of that information already. We'll share it with the board, but want to dialogue with the subcommittee. But just so you know, there's discussions around it, and we'll give you that as something to talk about further.
Thank you.
Okay.
I just wanted to point out, this was discussed at the facilities subcommittee, that some of these projects you should be paying attention to as sort of needing to be done together. So I'm going to highlight that in particular for the board. When you're taking a look at the high school, for example, number 9, which is the student commons, really would need to be done at the same time as number 11, which is the new 3rd floor bridge, which kind of also is in sort of the same area as the larger guidance suite as well. So I think it's important when you're looking at some of these areas in the building to appreciate that although they're presented as separate projects, they're really larger projects, so just keep that in mind. And then also we discussed, particularly with respect to the high school, and the spaces for lunch are dependent on the decisions that are going to be made with the schedule. So we've asked administration to go back and take a look on, at the schedule and what that would look like for unit lunch, because that makes a difference where we're expecting everybody to eat at any given time. So that's just something that we discussed to keep in mind as well. And I think all of us were generally struck with the concepts of the Main Street concept at the high school, that it seemed like a really nice way to give students flexible space, whether it's for eating or projects or after school or concerts. It was just a nice way of having the students connected as much as they wanted to be connected, while also being able to find some of their own individual spaces. And then others can talk as well, but, we just asked generally a lot of question about practicalities of some of these designs versus others and how they all fit in together. So I just kind of wanted you guys to know what we were looking at.
The middle school outdoor space, I don't know if the facilities committee thought about, or just in general, the students maybe given some, I guess, feedback,
Yeah.
or, I don't know, design or input to what they may want in that space?
Yeah, so I think what's important to note is that a lot of these conversations we've talked more so with administration. If conceptually some of these start to move forward, we clearly need to talk to staff about them, particularly if we're looking at music space. We want to hear from our music teachers and how that space will be utilized. Outdoor space, you want to talk to physical education teachers as well as students. What would they want to see and what would that look like? I think it's fair to share that we're going to, I'll use an example, a current example. We're looking to use some money that we received from our senator to support some additional outdoor space At Roosevelt School, if you think about Roosevelt, there's no playground area, right? So there's a small blacktop, which is really a basketball court. So it's a real challenge for us, particularly on when the grass is wet, because it's a beautiful field, but there's not. It's a challenge when the ground is not dry. The input around any playground space will include students to get a sense of, we don't want to build it and they don't come. We want them to come. We basically want them to be utilizing and enjoy the space, and also be multifunctional for other ages, if beyond just, in this case, in Roosevelt, 5th grade. The middle school is a unique space. Those are different learners, so we want to make sure that too considers their needs. The board had some preliminary discussions, like some kids just want to sit quietly, and they need a space for that. Others want to be actively involved, whether it's playing basketball or any other games that they find of interest, and we want to provide space for that as well. And how can it be multifunctional for instruction as well? Might be some things to consider, particularly with outdoor space. So that's a long answer to a yes. Yes, student voice is important.
I know it's kind of still in the beginning stages, but what would the projected timeline be to bring all of these projects to fruition? And would it be like a simultaneous effort, not just by building, within one building, but as far as the whole district in total?
Yeah, so those are, part of it will be driven by the costs associated with them and which projects we choose to prioritize. Conversations to still be had with the board, entire subcommittee and entire board, is looking at the financial options. The board, along with the community, we established a capital reserve fund. The question becomes, do we stagger that over time and wait to, lack of a better word, tap into the capital reserve, or do we expedite some of the projects? So based on needs. We know the needs are here now. Do we start doing more projects earlier on, knowing that potentially could be an option? So I don't really have a clear timeline to that, other than to say that we're looking at this as from basically a 5-year view, and what can we do over time, and how might we start to address it. Like the high school, just using that example, Board Trustee Crossling mentioned this. You couldn't do those all at the same time, and you have to figure out the staging associated with it, because you got to build one before you build the other, and that's where architects or construction managers can help in that process. Certainly, if we have separate projects working in different buildings, that's much easier to manage.
Just one other question. So, speaking of the green energy and exploring those options, are we considering any other options, other green options as we're doing this construction, and how we're, outfitting, whether it just be light bulbs or, how things are, constructed to try to modify things as best we can as we're kind of changing things?
Yeah, so we haven't had formal conversations about, energy use, but I think it's fair to share that anything that we outfit the buildings and spaces with will be as energy efficient as possible. There might be a little more cost up front, but the cost over the long term is to the benefit of, the district budget and obviously our taxpayers. If we can save energy, that's what we'd want to do. So that's been our focus. Little by little, you can see, years ago, we went through an energy performance contract. We had upgrades and bring in more energy efficient lighting into our buildings, and we're still doing that in various spaces throughout the district. So with new space in particular, that gives us, it's a much easier option, because it'll be just part of the project bid and how we go about our business. It's a great question. Thank you.
Anyone else? Greg?
A couple thoughts. I'm one facilities committee meeting in, so I'm not that deep. But I'll share, and it's like a board retreat. Something you don't know about me is I love home remodeling shows, $1 Million Listing, any of the patched up, whatever, fix it up shows. And I kind of look at that like this, this is a list that all looks great, and you're like, sounds good, and then you attach a budget to it, and you're like, whoop, can't do all that. Again, just my own take on it. And you have to then go through and say, okay, I can't have the master bath remodel and the open kitchen. I got to decide which one I want, and which one I want this year and which one next year. So I think that's where this is very preliminary, and this is kind of these are things that are on the list that could be done this year, next year, 5 years from now. What will be coming is people's versions of prioritization of what, of this list, what's the most critical in the next year or two, and then what's 3 or 4 years out, and then what's stuff that sounds good, but you balance with the community's ability to finance it, it just doesn't make the cut. So I think that's what will be our conversation over the next couple months and year plus. So that's how I view this. I think such a key part of this that we need to keep focused on is the enrollment piece, where, there's, I'm going to throw out a number just to make the point. It's just a number. Let's say it's $30 million worth of stuff. If we know that our enrollment's going to increase because of building and whatever going on, we might spend most of that money on increasing classroom space. If we look at our current enrollment, which is projected in decline, not factoring in other factors which we need to look at, you would say, well, maybe I shouldn't spend all $30 million on enrollment. I should spend more on remodeling, on fixing up, on, we know like cafeterias, one of the things we haven't touched. But so I think we need to, when the demographer's back, really dig deeper to say, like that chart, I looked at the October enrollment, like it's showing a number that's down from that. So, if that's what we're seeing, we would maybe prioritize things one way. I think we need to, because of the dollars involved, dig a little deeper to say, there's a lot of conversations in the community of developments that may be happening, and, inventory them and figure out, is it, 100 more kids if they all happen? Is it 500 more kids? Like, what's the order of magnitude, which I think, would really help us prioritize this stuff. And without it, I think we're guessing. And I would hate to, spend a bunch of money adding space and to be sitting here 5 years later saying we just don't have the kids, or vice versa. So I think this, I know this is the beginning of the process, and I know we'll do that, but I just want to highlight that.
Yep.
That's such a key factor.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you.
And it's hard to look at those things 5 years out. I mean, remember, like, the middle school was the addition at the high school, and then 5 years later, they built a whole new middle school, right? So, I mean, some of this is just, you got to see the numbers that come in. I mean, I saw the 150 students drop. If it was really across all the grades, you're talking like 10 or 12 kids a grade. So I don't think it addresses kind of the crunches that you're in. Certainly the new developments are going to have to play into that or not. And, if they didn't happen, you might have a little more breathing room for sure. But, it's hard to look at things 5 years out. I mean, 2 and 3 years is a little bit easier. But prioritizing, I don't disagree with anything that was said. We have to take a look at where things are at in the moment.
I mean, I just want to keep in mind that our staff, entire teachers, administrators, everyone does an outstanding job of making the space work. But there are real challenges. Talk to Stephen Hancock, our high school principal. He says it gets really, really hard to schedule the building because of building utilization and finding rooms. And he says there's no free rooms first period. That's a real challenge for him. So it doesn't provide, we want our buildings to provide our administrators and our staff flexibility. So my point being is that when you're at capacity, it doesn't provide for a real instructional flexibility that we need and what we want within our spaces. So we don't often hear that, but I want to make sure that I articulate that, is that sometimes to the benefit of our staff and the good work that they do, they make the spaces work and do really well, and our programs do succeed. They do really well. Looking at, championship basketball teams to robotics and science research, you name it, the arts, our programs really do well, but I can just imagine if we had even better space to support the type of programs that we offer here, the type of work that would take place, and equipping our staff with what they need to best serve our students. And I think that's just a lens that I want us to continue to think about as we go forward and continue to dialogue around facilities, is what do our staff really need to support the types of programs that we want to offer. our weight room is not good enough for, I would say that out loud, for the types of programs that we want to offer our students and the type of weight room it should be for our students. Is it do our kids make it work? Yes. Do our staff make it work? Yes. But it can be better. And I think that's the lens that we should be looking at, and certainly the dollars associated with, the fiscal part is really, really important. But we should be striving to really be thinking about that as well along the way. And I can better articulate that if you needed that for board discussion about what that really looks like. And the real challenges our buildings have in terms of just running the buildings because of a lack of space, even meeting space. It's not something that's outlined there, but they really don't have much meeting spaces. Like libraries closes because they need to run a professional development, or if they can't get 400. That's not the way we want to operate our buildings. We don't want to impact instruction. So there's a lot of variables that we can continue dialoguing about, but just want to put that out there.
The only other thing I wanted to add, which ties into all of this, is we did at the Facilities Committee ask questions surrounding, for example, the STEM lab addition at the middle school. What's the possibility of making that a flexible space? Maybe we initially have it as a STEM lab, but let's put in place something to easily convert it into classrooms if we needed to use it into classrooms. So that discussion is being had. And then, another example is this Brookside Gym extension. I think that there was a comment about, if we're going to extend it, let's make it a size that's regulation enough that some of our older teams could go in there, or our community groups could go in there on the weekends and use it for a full-size basketball game or whatever game, just so that we're really making it space that's the most usable as possible. So just wanted to add that.
Okay, great, thank you. I'd like to open it, everybody, okay? I'd like to open it to the audience if anybody has any questions or comments on this topic before we move into the next topic. Okay, more to come. Thank you.
All right, so I just want to thank our architects that are here, Chris.
Thank you,
for
Chris.
being here, and all the work that they've done to help support us to this point and getting the projects that we have completed, and also the facility subcommittee for their efforts. And these are just conversations. We want feedback as we go forward. This isn't the plan yet, and so feedback from everyone's going to be really important. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, great, thank you. Okay. Okay. And we're going to move into 3.2, discussion regarding the following policies: 7500, naming and renaming facilities; 7500R, naming and renaming facilities regulation; 7501, recognition; and 7502, establishing memorials. And I'm going to ask Dr. Sanchez to start us off here.
Yeah, so just for for clarity in terms of process, we have a board policy committee that meets basically every other month to review various policies. Some are brought up sooner, meaning that there's a cycle, but at the same time, there are times because of needs, laws change, that policies are brought forward and reviewed out of cycle, so that we present them to the board. There's what's termed a first read and then a second read. First read is basically just that, is that it's presented to the Board of Education and for review before it's the next step, which is an adoption of said policy. Just want to put that out there. There's a lot of great things that happen in Ossining. I just named a few earlier during the Facilities Committee. And there are different ways in which we want to recognize, whether it's teams, individuals, or staff members at various times. And so I think the intent, actually I know the intent of the policy was to put some structure so that we have a place to refer to as we move forward, and some guidance for boards of education and staff members and community members. So tonight I want to thank the board for putting this out there for discussion. We know that there's some feelings. I can sense that we're probably going to have some conversations around this with our community, and we want that. But unlike other policies, we don't normally put it on an agenda. So it was intentional to put it on the agenda so that it encouraged staff members and/or community members to join us in the conversation. Because ultimately, we want to take whatever the policy is, that it takes into consideration all perspectives. So I want to thank the board, because this has actually been going on for, seems like 3 years now, probably more, not more. So we're at a point where we're at the first read, and we hope that our colleagues and community members join us in conversations and provide their perspectives. So I think I'm going to turn it over to Greg or Lisa.
Okay, so we thought maybe we'll give some historical context before we read, or you think we should read the policies first, and then we'll start talking about the historical and the discussion.
Up to you.
All right, I think we should talk about how we came to this. So,
Quick question.
Sure.
Are we going to read each policy, then discuss it, or we're going to read all, or we're going to go through the whole thing? Like, are we going to read 7501, then discuss 7501?
they're all related, so we're going to probably open it up right now for a discussion of how we got here, and then we'll read it, and then we'll have a discussion for the board members. So, and then we want to open it up to the audience to have further discussion. So let's start with the historical background. So either Frank.
Sure,
it'll
you'll
be-
jump in.
Go ahead.
I mean, I think part of this with boards get requests for naming facilities, for memorials, for recognitions, right? And so the best practices really is to kind of, before you're in the position, to have a framework around it. And the way we've been trying to look at it is really through a consistent lens of consistency, equity, alignment with policy, appropriateness of it, and impact to students, and sort of what the research is out there around practices. So that's the attempt. These things kind of fit together because, we did have separate policies for facility naming, for instance. And I don't know that we had one for recognitions, but we did have did we have a memorial policy? I guess we didn't. I think we didn't. One of the things that if you go through all the guides is get yourself set up with these policies so that you have them in time so that you're not making things on the fly. And so that's part of what the process is. And so, the first draft of this is to really bring it to the board. Like Dr. Sanchez says, there's a few readings, but, there would be changes potentially, and so the community needs to be involved and understand it. So, you want to give more of a...
Yeah, Frank and I and Lisa, we've talked about this a lot. I mean, we started, I think board years are blurry, but it was like 4 years ago where there were a number of requests that came in, and we had formed a committee. I remember, Brian, you were on the committee, and a couple staff and a community member or two, and it was really to say, as these requests come in, the old policy, which is the current policy, was like 3 sentences, and so it was very high level, like no guidance to the board. And you run into a situation where someone's coming to request, and you don't have anything to fall back on to say that's in line or not in line with the request. So we sat down, really it started with the naming sort of opportunities, and as we got into the conversation, it made sense to say, well, what about, we started looking around schools and saying, well, what about things that we've memorialized, memorials that have happened, and then you get into, well, we've got recognition. So we've really, if you think about it, the policies that we're going to read currently are like 3 sentences, and now we're going to 4 or 5 pages. So it's a big change, and so I think that's why we want to take some time to understand it and make sure that it's not, we're all in agreement and we're on board with the implications. I think just philosophically, I think, without getting into how we implemented this, I think there were a couple things we were trying to get in conceptually. One was that there's a process, that things don't just happen, they get approved, and we know who approves it and how long they're approving it for. That if there's cost involved, we're a public institution, and there needs to be sort of an accounting of where the money came from, just so we know what's happened. A lot of what we're going to talk about is sort of the balance between wanting to recognize student achievement and being a public institution where you've got to be somewhat equitable and manage that sort of balance. there's appropriate for the environment, so we'll talk about things like makeshift memorials, which is one example where something could happen. You have a makeshift memorial that pops up. You may decide at Brookside School that's not appropriate to leave there for very long, but we have nothing in place to say that, we should do that or not do it. And again, it was the kind of thing we wanted to talk about before it happened, so when it happens, it's not like a board has some guidance instead of reacting and it being an uncomfortable situation. I think there's a question of, what sort of, I don't know what the term, like school monitor, like we have trophy cases that have always sort of historic, or the museum, the school's monitored and they've kind of got their own system. So, what fits under that umbrella versus what needs to be, is approved other places around the buildings. Waiting, you'll see there's some wording on memorials of, again, I don't know what's right or wrong, but sort of saying in a memorial situation, if someone comes to the board kind of in the heat of emotion, we wanted to say, like, you have to wait a year so that, people are out of the emotion, and if they really still feel compelled to push for whatever memorializing, everyone can think about it and have some time to get out of the emotion. So you'll see that in there. One or two other things. I guess, that was it. I think the way I look at it is, we started it, and I think as we have our conversation, it's good to make this distinction in terms of time frame. Like, we try to make the policies, say, going forward to give future boards a way to make these decisions. And so when I look at the policies, my primary thinking is, like, if this stuff happens in the future, what do we want in place? So as we talk about, I'd suggest we do that. Now, the issue that comes up in that is that there may be things that we decide would be the case going forward that may not reconcile with things that are already in place. So then we have to say, okay, if the new policy says XYZ, or we don't think, XYZ would fit on the current policy, what do we do about things that are already in place? What do we do? Do we extend them, grandfather them, take them down? Like, what do we do? Sort of became like the consequence of if we haven't had a policy to adhere to. Now if we have a policy, what do you do with stuff that may or may not align? And I think most of it, and I was thinking we should, after this, we did do an inventory of pretty much everything in all the buildings that I don't think the board has seen, certainly recently, maybe a long time ago we passed it out. But there's probably 50, 30 to 50, a garden here, a tree there, a plaque, bunch of plaques. So as we talk about, there's lots of things currently in place that, there'll be a step to say, of those things, what's the impact?
Great. I just want to let everybody know that right now we're just discussing it. We're not voting on anything at this point of the meeting, so we want to open it up. And what I'm going to do is just read it, and then we'll open it up to the board to further discuss, and then we'd like to open it up to the audience. So we'll start with the policy we did have in place, which was adopted on July 7th, 1998, and then further, this would be 7,500 naming and renaming facilities, and then it was, the last it was updated was November 30th, 2011. So this was, the Board of Education is solely responsible for naming and renaming any facility or part or parts thereof. The board, in its discretion, may establish procedures for the naming and renaming of any buildings or other district facility. Suitable building plaques or other memorials may be authorized by the board. The criteria and process are outlined in 7500-R. So the added part was the criteria. So we really only had that paragraph in historically. Right. So then what's been added in the discussion, this is one of the hardest, so I've been on the policy committee committee, this will be my third year, and this was one of our toughest ones to determine, I think Greg really pointed out in terms of going forward and reconciling and what is currently existing. And as you see, it was a very a broad policy. All right, so for 7500-R, which is naming, renaming, facilities regulation, the board shall have broad and sole discretion to consider any criteria its current members believe are appropriate for naming or renaming of a district facility and may establish more detailed procedures than those which are set forth herein. The Board of Education will have the final decision in approving the individuals to be honored and the manner and format by which the names will be displayed. The definition, the term facility is intended to include buildings of all types, all indoor spaces such as rooms, hallways, classrooms, wings, gym, and auditorium, and et cetera, as well as outdoor space areas that may not have physical walls but are identifiable areas of district landscape, such as gardens, recreation fields, and et cetera. General criteria, number 1, individuals and groups being considered must have made significant contributions to one or more of the following: field of education, schools of Ossining, community of Ossining, human betterment. Number 2, in keeping with the mission of the district, all those considered for having district building space or object named in their honor, the individual or group must represent the collective commitments of the district. A, honesty, B, integrity, C, respect. Process for the request. Number 1, nominating group or person must consider the identified criteria when making a recommendation. Number 2, a written petition shall be provided to the superintendent of schools. The report should include the following: biographical data and significant contributions. Okay, 7501.
Not that.
Yeah, flip it over. Yeah. Just flip it over.
Back us.
Back, yeah.
750R.
Okay, C.
We're being green.
Okay, so back to, they must provide a petition with biological data, significant contributions, and C, a statement of why a facility should be named after the person. The decision makers, number 1, the superintendent of schools will present the petition to the Board of Education for their approval. In order to ensure careful consideration and the due diligence is conducted by the district, naming or renaming requests may not be voted on by the board for 1 year from the time of the initial request. 2, to allow time for public responses, no request shall be acted upon until 3 readings of it by the board of at least 3 Board of Education meetings. And the duration of the facility's name shall be indefinite unless future boards of education wish to rename the facility. Okay. 7501, recognition. Definition. The principal, in his or her discretion, may approve requests to acknowledge individuals, student, group of students, a club activity, teacher, or school that have provided outstanding service to the school district or recognize school accomplishments in the form of team pictures, plaques, banners, paintings, sculptures. Process to request. Approval by the principal is required before the form of recognition can be displayed. The duration. Typically, items of recognition should be removed within a year of the class or person achieving the recognition, graduates, or moves to the next school year. Recognition items must be approved by the principal and should not exceed 1 year. Requests for recognition exceeding 1 year shall be presented to the Board of Education for its approval and shall not exceed 5 years except when such recognition is in a designated trophy case, the district museum room, or on plaques with lists of students. The form of recognition should be appropriately sized in an equitable manner, not attract more attention than warranted, and be respectful of the area where displayed. Acceptance of privately funded recognition items shall be accepted by the Board of Education in accordance with the Board of Education Policy 1800, gifts from the public. So this piece was in place, recognition, back in October 11, 2017, and it was...
No, we did a
Yeah.
reading, but it never got it.
We did our second reading and adoption.
I don't think, I saw that today, Lita was out. I don't think we ever adopted it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that doesn't seem
Yeah,
correct.
I think that,
mean,
yeah. All right, so
A lot of times, there's dates at the bottom of these from old policies, and I'm guessing somebody
Right.
fixed a typo on a previous one,
Yep.
maybe from like 2000 earlier, but yeah, we did a first reading for sure, yeah.
Because in essence, that would have been this, this would have been,
Yeah.
so this is not in place. Okay. Establishing memorials. The Board of Education will consider requests for memorials in honor of deceased students, employees, or other members of the school community on an individual basis. Memorials must be age-appropriate by school, including type and duration for the memorial. The form of the memorial should be appropriately sized in an equitable manner, not attract more attention than warranted, and be respectful of the area where displayed. The board recognizes that in very special cases, it may be appropriate to memorialize a person. Scholarships should be proposed as an alternative to memorials when possible. Duration. Memorials exceeding 1 year shall be presented to the Board of Education for its approval and shall not exceed 5 years. Under special circumstances determined by the Board of Education, the board can lengthen this time period. For example, the board may allow memorial trees to be planted. Any makeshift memorials should not be on display for more than 2 weeks. Anyone seeking a more permanent memorial should contact the school principal. General criteria. Individuals and groups being considered must have made significant contributions to one or more of the following: field of education, schools of Ossining, community of Ossining, human betterment. In keeping with the mission of the district, all those considered for having district building space or object named in their honor, the individual or group must represent the collective commitments of the district: honesty, integrity, and respect. Process to request. The nominating group or person must consider the identified criteria when making a recommendation. A written petition shall be provided to the superintendent of the schools. The report should include the following: biographical data, significant contributions, statement of why a memorial should be established for the person. The decision makers. The superintendent of schools will present the petition to the Board of Education for its approval. To allow time for public responses, no request shall be acted upon until 3 readings of it by the board at least 3 Board of Education meetings. Acceptance of privately funded memorials shall be accepted by the Board of Education in accordance with the Board of Education Policy 1800, gifts from the public. Again, this was never an adopted policy. It was, again, worked on in the group. So I want to open it up to my colleagues here to any questions, thoughts about what we just read before we open it up to the audience.
Yeah, I have some concerns with 7501 recognition.
I guess, Lisa, before your comments, one question, and we could do it either way, is whether we should go one at a time so we don't circle through. Should we do like 7,500 first, naming, and then go to recognition, and then, only because we've done this in the policy committee and we'll go in circles if we talk about them all at the same time? Just,
Okay, yeah, that's a good idea. Okay, so we'll start with 7500-R. Which is really extension of 7500.
and I don't mind saying, I think the 2 key points that we just want to review and be comfortable with, one is the idea that if somebody comes to the board, that the policy is saying you have to wait a year before the board can act on it. So that's new, and we just need to make sure we're comfortable with that. And then the second thing is that naming of something is implied that that's an indefinite, until something comes along and you want to rename it for whatever reason, there's not a time period. So I think those, obviously comments on anything, but I think those are the 2 ones that we want to make sure we're comfortable with, because those are both new. I guess inherently things have been indefinite, but the 1 year was definitely, and again, it just, it's the example of a teacher, student, community member passes away, and the next meeting, there's 100 people at a board meeting, it's saying to a future board, you can consider it, but wait a year before you rename the school or whatever.
This then wouldn't apply, for example, to requests where people come and say, we're having this big track meet this week and we want to have it in honor of so-and-so. Oh, sorry about that. So this wouldn't apply to a temporary request to name a championship game after, coach or or a tournament after someone in particular, this week's tournament, we're going to have in honor of so-and-so, and we want you to say that officially. I remember there was a request like this last year. I think Bill Kress brought it. Somebody went to
There was there have been a couple. The wrestling tournament, there's the track meet.
So
That's
that would not
Right.
then fall under 7500-R?
No, that's specific for facility naming.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a building, a wing of a building, something physical that you're naming,
Gotcha.
right? Not an event, not a, it's if it's,
Right.
So we don't have a policy then for those kinds of,
Well, we have a very broad policy that says it's the board's discretion. I mean,
Okay.
in most of these things, that's what it is. This kind of spells it out a little bit more, gives them more detail.
gotcha.
Yeah.
Anyone have any more questions or comments? And do we want to open it up do we want to just go through each one with the board, and then we'll open it up, each one for the audience, or however? Okay. All right, so moving into recognition, 7501.
So
Aaron.
just a couple of thoughts here. I think the duration part needs to be reinvestigated, in part because I think it goes against what we stand for and pride in all that we are. And we're talking about removing, plaques and banners that recognize teams or groups or individuals that contributed to the Ossining community and the Ossining School District. For example, I used to, my freshman year, I would walk to biology, and I would see all the banners on the wall, the science research of all the winners. And I said, how do I become one of them? How do I apply to this great program? They have such a great history. And, because of that, I applied. I remember in sophomore year, looking at the gym wall, seeing pictures of Sanaya Chong and the basketball team, state champions. Let me go to this basketball game and support them. I have pride in that. If we start removing stuff, then I don't think we stand for our district slogan, which is pride in all that we are. So I think we need to revise that with the duration and leave things up, because a generation from now, 2 generations from now, you're going to have people who graduated here, their kids and grandkids are going to go to this district, and they're going to say, that's my mom on that wall, that's my uncle on that wall, that's my cousin who achieved this. That's pride. That's what we stand for. So I think, again, we just need to revise it before we can adapt that. That's it.
I'm just trying to get clarification on that. So from my perspective, the 1 year is intended so that recognition is cyclical and that there's an equitable distribution of recognition, because how much space can you utilize for recognition if you don't put some type of time period on, okay, now we're going to change it out and recognize. Is that the intention behind the 1 year? So it can make room for new recognition, as opposed to, there's only but so much space you can utilize.
Look, Frank.
Yeah, and there may be things flexibly that a principal wants to bring up. I mean, I guess the question is what goes up permanently and what doesn't, right?
Right.
And so then what's the criteria, and how do you do that across a lot of different disciplines, with equity across the board, I mean, so that's the tricky part of this one. You don't want to have a certain part of the building that has everybody's name up, and then you have students that have done remarkable things and there's nothing up. So the 1 year, I think, encourages people to basically, to basically get it up and cycle those through. And I guess the question is, in the duration pieces, is then what do you look at as your criteria for how you do that longer, right? That's the challenge of this one.
I would agree with you, but I think space is not an issue in my opinion. I mean, look at the walls. We've got plenty of space in this room alone. And until spacing becomes an issue, I don't think we should have a duration piece in there.
I just want to add, I was listening, I think, it seems like there's like 2 perspectives on this, which both make sense to me. My suggestion, or just as an idea, what if there was a way after a certain period of time that I guess the person is like transitioned to like a record book or something that we keep? I know we have a museum that's not really, functional, but maybe that's something we can think about. Like, how do we transition things that are 10 years or more in a way that we kind of consolidated where we're still acknowledging those persons, and we have a record of it, and there's a place where people can actually look and be prideful for basketball players that have come through and like, oh, this is a picture or a news clipping or whatever the case may be. Maybe we make our museum, an actual museum. Just a thought, just trying to figure out a way to kind of marry two ideas where I get you want to acknowledge, and for a good period of time you're going to have students or staff that know these people and they want to see that there in the time that they're there. But we also do know that time passes by. We don't want to lose the pride, but at the same time we do want to make sure we make space for the next person that may need to, in that time and space, be acknowledged and recognized, maybe in a more prominent space. But transition that thought to a place where there's an official record book that we have that says, okay, somebody that's worked here for, 30 years, we put them in there, whatever it is. So just a thought.
I see both perspectives as well. Before I share my thoughts, I just wanted to acknowledge that the Board of Education did receive an email from Irving Cavey, who suggested the last line of the first paragraph under duration, where it ends currently with lists of students, that the following language be added: Hall of Fame walls, team and individual athletic accomplishment walls, cultural arts walls, and academic accomplishment walls. And I think that kind of addition is accurate and does sort of capture what we're trying to get across in this. It does strike me just viscerally that 1 year and 5 year does seem light or short for recognition. Yet in the same token, when I go back and visit my own high school, it says that we were the boys cross country champions of 1965. And we were the champion of something else in 1971. There's not a lot from 2000. So, I get the perspective of like, where do we draw the line with perpetuity here? And at some point we have to be relevant. We have to make space for, the school moving in a different direction, and we have to make sure all students are recognized, and I totally support that. I guess my takeaway is 1 year seems light, 5 years seems a little light, 10 years doesn't seem light, but beyond that, I don't have much more concrete input to provide, so thank you.
A couple of thoughts. I think, and I know the wording says 5 years, I think, one, this is all, nothing's set in stone. I think the approval, the same issue on memorials was, again, this is just me speaking, is, you're get approved for 5 years. It doesn't mean on the first day of the 6th year that stuff necessarily comes down. It was more of a, you're approved for 5 years and you can be revisited, and if the, powers at the time feel like it should stay up, it was not, at least my mind to me, meant as a black and white, it's up or down. I know that gets tricky in process, because then it's like, how much board table time do you want to spend talking about whether something's up or down? Which, I guess, whether it's, the Irwin change who suggested, I think, to me, I like the idea of the school managing some of this themselves. So whether it's science research in your example or athletics, I went by the athletics, like we don't as a board, approve who gets picked in the Hall of Fame each year. Like there's a group within the school that knows the people in the Hall of Fame. I don't know who's in the Hall of Fame and not, and there are probably people on there I'd be like, they were lousy, and then there's to be someone who was good. I don't know. I want to
try. Are you in the Hall of Fame?
I'm not in the Hall of Fame. Down to the Ultimate Frisbee Club. No recognition. So, what is that? I mean, cultural arts by the auditorium has a list of some of my classmates that were, whatever, orchestra person or whatever. So I think, and that's what I think was sort of that wording of plaques with list of students. So what I would like, and we, I don't know if we ever, we sort of sent the policy out to the school to say, what do they think is internally within the high school, and this could exist at the other schools as well. We focus on the high school. What's working, what's not working? Do they feel there's an imbalance of one group, there's more of something than the other? I think it's tricky with the sports world because when you go to sports stadiums, people recognize people with big numbers, and it's just the way things are done in the sports world, which when you go to, not that I go to Carnegie Hall, I don't know if there's the same sort of tradition of recognizing people. So I don't know how to, there's maybe a plaque in Carnegie Hall, say, you were whatever. So I don't know how to reconcile that sort of cultural ways that different groups recognize people, and whether you stick to that or whether you say, no, everyone has to have the same, the cultural arts plaques are 18 by 24 and names are 2 inches high. Does everyone adhere to that, or do you say, whatever? And so I think we have, we certainly have to figure out what's included in the sort of accept language.
So does everybody, as we're talking about, if we break it down to the general criteria, does anybody have questions about how, because it seems to be the duration and how long we keep something up, and it seems to be the challenge, but does anybody have any question about the general criteria that we're using for any of these policies?
I think part of it is like with this, so if there are policies and procedures in place, what's being done to this point? So we have a Hall of Fame. Is it an athletic Hall of Fame? Is it, people that excel in the arts? Like, how does that all play out, right? And are we seeing that, I would say with space, where we're recognizing, are we putting different groups in prominent areas? So are we giving equal treatment to, or not equal treatment, but equitable treatment to the different groups? Are we sticking somebody off in a corner on the 3rd floor and we're giving somebody the main entrance, right? Sorry. So those are the kinds of questions I think that really kind of cycle around this. I think it's something we tried to pull from the buildings initially, and the high school is kind of the biggest fit. I don't know that we really kind of got a clear picture of that. I think part of a policy like this sort of drives a question around it, but Martha Quinn was the VJ, with first VJ on MTV. Should she be in a Hall of Fame somewhere in the building? These are the kinds of things. And then the question is how much space do you want to allocate? Where do you put these spaces? What do we have? We know, and where are you going to do it? So that drives the question of how long you would potentially keep, I think,
and we try to
things off.
Right, and we try to, thank you, we try to look at other schools too, and how's everybody else, like similar size, and all those different things we tried. We really didn't find any good examples, or we saw some, and so that was difficult. We went out there. There's really, it's almost so local community.
It is. Yeah, there's not a lot out there. Yep, in this area.
So before we open it up to the audience, I just want to see if anybody has any questions about Policy 7502, establishing memorials.
Yeah, I did want to say one. One of the things that I was thinking about is we should probably do an inventory of what we have. I don't know if that's been suggested, but I think we should know from building to building, what's out there, and maybe take some pictures and have a log so we can just keep track of it. At the very least.
We did that, and we should have,
Right, we should have sent it out.
We should have.
We have it.
We'll send that.
It didn't get the pictures, but for the most part, you can get a sense, or if you look at the list and you just come in, like the high school, a certain way, and you'll
get pictures, that'd be great.
And the majority.
We ask for pictures, there's so many of them. I mean, again, if we can get pictures, that's.
We have a list, that's a starting point, right?
Yeah.
And we have a lot of Ossining graduates that sit on the school board, so there's a lot of you that fully, that know of it too, and might recognize some and might not know of others. Okay, so At this time, if we have no more questions, I'd like to open it up to the audience.
Can we do 72?
Oh, we just,
Not just 70.
I wanted to comment.
oh, sorry, just,
So wait, are we doing all of them?
We
and
just-
then opening up, or one by one?
well, we went through, this is the last one.
We didn't do the memorials, Lise. We didn't do the
Right.
7502.
Sorry, Coach. Sorry.
No.
Okay,
Can we do 72?
You wanna-
we're going to do this one, yep.
Okay, my comment on this is at the end of the duration paragraph where it says, anyone seeking a more permanent memorial should contact the school principal. I would just suggest that language be added, something along the lines of, going back to any makeshift memorial should not be on display for more than 2 weeks. I would suggest adding and removed at the discretion of the principal, and then anyone seeking a more permanent memorial should contact the school principal. And then I would suggest adding who may leave the memorial in place for a longer period of time at their discretion. Any request for a makeshift memorial to be on display longer than 2 months must be approved by the principal and the BOE. Just because I can envision a situation where a principal, basically says contact the principal, but then there's sort of no step beyond that. And so I would like to give it a little bit more direction, guidance to the principal that they do have the ability to extend that if that's what the climate of the school at the time needs. For example, say something gets started June 1st, school's out June 21st, the reality is we would want that principal to be able to extend it until June 21st at that principal's discretion. So that was the basis for that comment.
Yeah, I mean, memorials are something that actually there is a lot out there on, both from like even the, U.S. Department of Education across the board. There's mental health professionals, there's societies that have stuff out there. I think the challenge with this one is basically how do you treat people, with equity at that point? And so a principal is going to get probably pressure in a circumstance to extend in a lot of circumstances. Then you also have certain circumstances where the advice is you really shouldn't allow a memorial to be in place. It can have negative consequences for students. So this is a tough one, right? And so I think there's policies out there that basically say, after the service has happened, a note should be put up that basically says we're going to collect all these and give them to the family or their designee and basically move it out right at that point, but done in a respectful way. I think the challenge is if you give flexibility, you're going to be in a position of putting the principals in a tough position. And really, the advice out there is to do the opposite, is to set some boundaries, especially for a makeshift one where it's, somebody comes in. Again, these are ones that nobody asked for approval for. They just kind of percolate and come up. You're being respectful in the moment, which is, but, how do you deal with that? Recognizing that it's the school for all the students, right? So that's the trick. And that's why in this policy, we did talk about it, and this policy was put out there without that, for that reason.
I see it as it should not be on display for more than 2 weeks, which wouldn't bar it simply being moved to a different location and then the 2 weeks sort of begin again. And I do think that, if we really are charging our principals for knowing the climates of their schools and the social, emotional needs of the students in those schools, that something like this should have a little bit of wiggle room for them to be able to come to the board and say, I know that this is the policy, but I want you to know what's going on, and this is my recommendation. And then the board be able to say yay or nay. Right. So that's my thought process behind that.
We didn't have time to do this. I wouldn't mind asking our principals. I think fortunately most of them have not been in that situation, but I don't have a strong feeling on a hard 2 weeks versus a flexible. I like the discretion for the principals to handle the situation, but 2 weeks makes it, clear cut, and then they don't have to be in the middle. But I'd be curious to see if they have any strong feedback on they'd like. I mean, at the end of the day, I think we're going from right now we have no policy. So if we made it, should come down to 2 weeks, no more than a month, like something, we're a whole lot shorter than we are today. But I'm not, It'd be helpful to get some input.
I just wanted to add to that, maybe with the 2 weeks, if we can put in some language that somewhere the principal, I guess, at the discretion of the principal, if they want to refer to the board, that way it gives them an out, so to speak, if they don't want to be the one to come up with that decision, kind of like they can escalate it to us, so that way we can give input.
Yeah.
Right. Except I think for the board's sake, we're basically saying, the board would say, well, you have to wait a year before we can approve a memorial, to try and avoid that thing, because it's going to be emotional and...
Right, but I think there was something that you read, there was 2 weeks, so was it the makeshift?
Yeah, I don't think the memorial says you have to wait a year. I think it says if you want it to exceed a year, then that's when it comes to the board, but it's not, the memorial doesn't establish that it takes a year to make a
I guess the
decision.
name, right.
Right, the naming tab.
I guess it got, the principal could approve something more permanent. I think this, right.
I think it just
They took the wording.
ends at principal, and I think it might need a little more clarification.
Right, there's a big gray area between that 2 weeks
Right.
and that year. It's like you keep getting extended if you go to the principal, and then if you bump up to a year, then it's saying you have to go to the board to get that, extension. But then there's a lot of gray area after that 2 weeks of back and forth with the principal.
Right. And I think, Frank, you're saying that the works in the area say, it's really the makeshift that's...
It'd be like the spontaneous
you
one
wanna
that pops up.
not leave out forever. If in week 3, 5, 10, 15, something more permanent can be discussed and agreed on and is appropriate, then the principal could approve that, whereas a makeshift isn't really being approved, it's just happening. But,
Yep.
I mean, I think, if we, it's not a bad idea to get the input from the principals, obviously, on this. I think we should really research this one and come back with, I think, while there's a lot of positive consequences for people, positive outcomes for people with basically in these circumstances of memorializing, there are other sides to that, and then you get into a situation where the advice in certain circumstances is don't do it. And so you get yourself into a tough position of, in these moments, how do you deal with this and deal with it equitably? So I think this is an area where if we want to get input, we should also really search this one deep, because there is a lot out there on. And I think we'd be doing a disservice if we didn't do that. I think these timelines and a lot of these policies were put in to provoke conversation, right? We weren't voting on this tonight. It was an attempt to put something reasonable, but it was certainly not going to be the end-all, be-all. But I think that we really need to do, the idea of permanent memorial, semi-permanent memorial, temporary memorial, they're all kind of classically defined, understood, and there's solid guidelines around what should be in a school and what shouldn't be, and we should really look at that.
Thank you.
I guess so going back to to me, I think the memorial policy is pretty close in my mind going forward. I think the makeshift we have to do. I think it's the one where we have the most work to do on reconciling what's in place with the policy, because I think that inventory would show us there's benches and garden, there's lots of memorials around the different buildings that we have to figure out what it means to them with the current policy, because there's many of them.
Okay. All right. I'd like to open it up to the audience. Thank you.
First of all, I'd just like to thank the board for listening to us and having us come in. Honestly, tonight I was going to come here and just ask you for more time, but listening to your discussion, I think I can answer some of the questions, and I'd strongly suggest that you bring in some of the stakeholders, like someone from the athletic department, someone from science research, someone from the arts, that can answer a lot of your questions. Because I can answer a lot of them now, but I'm going to ramble, because I'm going to go back and forth and try to go back. I was trying to take notes as you were speaking. As far as the Hall of Fames go, there are 2 Hall of Fames. There's an Ossining High School Hall of Fame, and there's an Athletic Hall of Fame. The Ossining High School Hall of Fame was run by Josh and Ronnie Cunningham, who both retired, and since then, nothing's been done with it. It's in the museum. Peter Falk is in there, and I believe Martha Quinn is in there as well. The Athletic Hall of Fame is run by the athletic department. We have old coaches, former coaches come back, and we have a process where they apply for it, and we have a vote and all of that stuff. So I answered that one. As far as the procedure that you guys talked about not being enough space, Right now, there's a procedure that I shared with Greg, and I think I asked him to share it with you guys, but it explains the procedure that we came up with because we are limited with space. So we got those big boards that the board of the Booster Club donated, and we were supposed to put them in the gym, but they set them up wrong, so we had to put them in a hallway. They took up a lot of space. But what we did is all the league champions, all the sectional champions, the regional champions are all listed in the hallway. The only thing in the gym are state champions, individual, which there are 8 of them, and team champions, which are 5 of them. So we came up with that as an athletic department with Josh Mandel, and that was our process. There's plenty of room to continue on with league champions and state champions, and there's plenty of room to put more into the gym. So space is not an issue, and you had mentioned that, Mr. Spring. As far as what we did when we first came in with Mr. Dinette and myself 15, 16 years ago, there used to be old banners in the gym, and they were back to the 60s and 50s. So we started it from 1950 on. So after like 50 years, then we picked up. But like a 5-year, 10-year thing is kind of tight. But we did go 50 years back with all the stuff we have. So if you go look now, the championships are there from 1950 on.
70 years now.
I really appreciate, Mr. Spring, what you had to say. The kids definitely look up to the awards. I'm going to give you 2 quick examples. One, if you know who Gino Ariema is, he's a basketball coach. He was in the building to see a volleyball game with Sanaya Chong. I walked him from the football field to the gym. As we're walking to the gym, the old science wing was all science research. He looked around and he said, oh my God, somebody knows what the heck they're doing in this place, because he saw all the science research awards. Nothing to do with sports. Our gym, as Ray knows, our gym was an eyesore forever. I've coached here 30 years. It was an eyesore. We had a green mat on one side, a red mat on the other side, green walls. We've done so much to improve the gym. Today I had a conversation with 2 Port Chester girls watching the volleyball game. The game was over. They looked up and said, you have an All-American? Because they saw the All-American thing on the wall. These are things we're proud of in Ossining. I shared with Mr. Hancock the other day. I travel a lot. I was in Aruba. I had an Ossining basketball shirt on. In Aruba, and someone comes up to me and goes, Ossining basketball, you guys have one of the best basketball teams in the country. Okay? These are things we should be proud of. Okay? The basketball program, the science research program. We should promote these things. Yes, equity's great. We list all the teams out there. But if a team does something great like our science research team does, like our state championship basketball team does, we shouldn't be taking that stuff down 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, no years. That's something that should be there forever. Like we said, like Mr. Spring said, you can go back in there and say, that's my mom, that's my grandma, all right? And we had a reason why we did pictures instead of names, because the names would have took up too much space. But that was all explained in the thing that I gave you. Just trying to go through it. I think we're on the right path, Mr. Gallo. You were talking about going back to the athletic department, going back to the science research program. Give them some input on this, because they're the ones that know what should be done and what shouldn't be done. You guys can make the final decision, but give them some input. As the athletic department, we didn't really get much input on this whole thing. And it's really a big decision. Right now, there's only a couple people here that care about this, but I'm going to tell you, it's going to be a big deal. If you go and take down the 23 on the wall, the pictures on there, it's going to be a big deal. All right, so I'm just letting you know that. As far as memorials go, I agree, that's a really tough one. Really, really tough one. I think, and I gave Mr. Gallup a thought I had today on that. Hopefully he shared with you guys. But I view the 23 not only as a memorial, I view that as a 105.3C, which they have, which donates to the district about approximately $8,000 to $10,000 a year, and they're putting up their logo. So I say, instead of taking it down, let's go to another 501(c)(3), like the Booster Club and Ossining Matters, and say, put your thing up there. Let's promote that. These are people that are giving to us. Yeah, there are other 501(c)(3)s like MUNE and ASO, but they get the use of our fields for free. They donate some money, and they get our use of our fields for nothing. What does the Federico family get for giving tens of thousands of dollars every year? They put the painting up, which they paid for to paint. I don't think that's a bad thing. I think it's a good thing. I coached football here for 15 years. Kids don't know who Christian Federico was. He died 10 years ago. But when they run by the wall, they touch where his number was. And his number wasn't even there anymore. Now they move the number up because it was peeling. But they touched that spot because they know the history of the Ossining football and Christian Federico, who died, if you don't know the story, he died running around the track in college sophomore year. Just dropped dead out of nowhere. was a kid that played 3 sports here, did all kinds of stuff. So, yeah, I get it, it's hard with memorials, but I look at that not as a memorial. I look at that as somebody donating to the district with nothing coming back. So I think we can do stuff like that. I think we should promote things like that. So, again, tonight I was going to come here and not say anything, just say, can you give us more time? But I think you guys have a lot of questions. You're doing some great things. That first policy, naming the facilities, outstanding, well-written, awesome. I think you guys are right on with that one. These other two, I think you really need to slow down and look at that stuff and include people that are involved in it. Because, yeah, I'm emotional. It's an emotional thing, but it's going to be a big thing. Some of you were here through the Indian process. I was here. It was ugly. This is going to be similar. I'm telling you, this is going to be big if we go that route. It's not going to be a smooth thing. It's not going to be like, okay, just take down the pictures. Take down this. It's not going to be that easy. There are a lot of people that wanted to come here tonight. I said, look, I'm just going to go there and ask for more time. There's a lot of people that want to come here and speak tonight. So if we're moving forward, there's going to be more people here. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
I'll be really brief. I'm Pat Wheeler. I teach in the district, but I also live in the district. I graduated from here in 2003, so I have recognition. Somebody said something about outside the auditorium with the cultural arts. My name is up there. I have things as an athlete and as a coach over in the athletic ends, and this is what I'm going to share. Ms. Crossling, you went to Duke, right?
That's correct.
Duke's pretty good at basketball, correct?
And other things.
And lacrosse and other things like that. Do they take the championship banners down from the rafters in their field house?
I have no idea, but I don't think so.
And Mr. Schnecker, you went to Syracuse, if I'm... But your family's from, or your wife's family's from Syracuse.
Yeah, that's true.
There you go. So they have some pretty significant numbers over there in Syracuse, if I'm not mistaken. You have the number 44 is pretty important, Jim Brown. 22 is really important in lacrosse. They put that up there. I just want to consider those types of things. You know, a state championship isn't something that lasts for a year. You know, you don't defend a state championship. A state championship is forever. The next year, you're not going and trying to defend it. You're going and trying to win another one. And our kids use that as motivation every single day when they walk in the gym. And I know that a lot of our other programs use that as motivation, saying, hey, if we win, we're going to get the same thing that those guys got. And that motivates us to do well, as I'm sure that a lot of the kids get motivation from science research and from robotics and from all the other things that we recognize. So as a taxpayer, as a teacher here, as a graduate, I'm just asking you to really consider that, because it is supposed to be, as you said, pride in all we are, and our kids are proud of what we've done. Thank you.
Thank you.
I said I was going to forget things, what you just said, because we talked about space. I called New York State today. The state championships in all sports have been around since 1920. We have 5. We have 5 since in 100 years. So it's not like we're beating down the walls with state championships. Ray knows when we won the first one, I thought it was the last one we'd ever win. But you know what helped win that next one? The pitcher. I'm telling you right now, we pointed to it every day in practice. You guys want a pitcher on the wall? Get on the line. Let's go. Let's go. Let's push. Let's push. Let's push. And we won the state championship the second year with no seniors on the team. And every year it's been trying to get it back there again, trying to get back there again. And it gets harder and harder and harder. But that helped. That helped down the road. But out of 100 years, we've got 5 teams in all sports, not just basketball.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Lou Federico. I guess I'm responsible for the 23 on the wall. I just want you, Coach Ricky pretty much said it all about the 23. I want you to know that it's an honor for me to have it up there, and I thank the district for allowing us to have it up there even for this long. You know, he was a good ball player, but besides that, he was a very good student. He was an honor society student, graduated high school with 21 college credits to go to college. And, you know, besides being an athlete, I take pride in knowing that he was a good student, too. As far as, you know, the other stuff with plaques and banners hanging, I go back to my old high school and I see the things from back in the 30s and 40s, and you know what, it made me look like I wanted to have something hanging on a wall too. So for these students here to see the plaques and the banners hanging, it's something that they can thrive for to have. So I just want to thank you for hearing us out.
Thank you.
Hi, Myrna Forney, and I just came to listen, but I really, I read this, and I'm a little perplexed by the idea of taking down things. I'm not sure, in all of my experiences, when I go back to my high school, you go back to college, the banners and things that hang up there go back years. So I would think that the policy would be better equipped if it detailed a way when we ran out of space, how you determine what comes down first, as opposed to setting a time limit for things that are up on the wall and there's no reason to take them down. I am concerned, again, about process. This talks about being able to petition, and I don't know if there's going to be a reg somewhere that outlines the process, but it doesn't really say, does one person make a petition? Is a petition 500 signatures? Is a petition 2 signatures? And so I'm really concerned about how you guys are really going to look at this and determine when there's enough support to warrant someone's memorial versus another. And without there being some kind of process and definition to that, I think that it really becomes a popularity thing, and whoever can get the most voices out, and timing. So I would like the policies to be a little bit more specific about process. And I really do think that the idea of taking down memorials or taking down recognitions doesn't make a lot of sense. The policy would be more effective, I think, if it defined how to determine when space runs out, what comes down. And I really do think that we need to give voices to the principals, because I think they hear from every corner, from the art world, from the sports world, from the academic world. And so to not give them a voice in how this process should work in their buildings seems disrespectful.
Thank you.
We do donate money to the community here, but we do it for the honor of having that hanging on the wall and other things too, just to keep his name alive. But we do run fundraisers for that purpose, just to donate back to the Ossining community. We lived here, he went to school here from peas and carrots through high school, and that's why we feel we give back. Thank you.
Thank you.
I just wanted to clarify that we haven't discussed a grandfathering in policy. That's still something that's being discussed, correct?
Right. And I just want to, first of all, just thank our audience and just really important conversations that we're having. And we've formed committees in the past, and we've tried to address the most equitable way to address these policies. And, you know, tonight bringing it out in the public was the most important thing that we can do tonight, and that is exactly what we wanted to hear back. And we've, in the past, have talked to some of the principals. We've had some input, but it hasn't been a real formal policy committee, and we've tried to. So I just want everybody to know that this wasn't just, you know, made up in some, you know, vacuum. But this is hard stuff, and so we really appreciate all that's been done and said tonight. So I want to turn this over to, sorry.
Go ahead.
Catherine, did you?
No, I think my question was, we haven't discussed, and there is no language regarding grandfathering yet. It was my understanding that that was something that was still going to be discussed as these sort of took shape.
Yep.
Let's see, I think two comments. One is, Mr. Wheeler, my school is the reigning national basketball champion, and Duke is not, so I want to make that very clear. But I think our conversation about grandfathering came in, and we need to brainstorm on this one, is to say, if we, like, what do we do if we have a new policy that tries to give us structure going forward, and then people come along in the future and say, well, what, you know, I know the new policy says this, but what about that and that and that? It's like, how do you reconcile? That was sort of the thing. So we could just say, I mean, we could do anything. We could say, you know what, everything up as of whatever today's date is, you know, stays as is, and everything going forward is the new policy, or somewhere in the middle. Like, that's sort of the conversation we had. And do you stop, you know, do you say, we're going to put the new policy in place? Yeah, we could put the naming, you know, I think we have definitely more consensus and we're closer on the naming. We could, which is what we originally started with, is to say, let's get the naming thing in place so that if anything happens, we're in good shape. And then let's keep working on the others to see, again, hopefully not taking forever, but figure out, get the list, and so the full board can see the list to see what, because you know, we talked about the 23, there's definitely other things that would be equally impacted in that they, you know, they were all sort of, to me, they were all sort of implicitly approved with the old policy because they all went up, and some may have been, you know, treated differently, but the old policy basically said the board can approve it, and if the board didn't do anything, that was sort of an approval. So what do you do? So I think we just need to figure out how, you know, like, to the grandfathering, you know, we've been stuck on the grandfathering for a long time.
I think it's complicated because I don't think the board was brought in on previous decisions that were made. I think that's part of where we need to make sure that that's in place, because you just don't want things appearing. So that's part of it. The other piece of this too is just, I think as we're looking and we're going to ask the principals, I think we need to get an understanding of where people's space is, what things are set aside, how much space it is. The Hall of Fame is great that it's in a museum, but maybe it needs to be in a place, you know, for the High School Hall of Fame, maybe it needs to be more prominently. Like, I think there needs to be, you don't want to just walk into a space and get the sense that it's one group that's being recognized, because that sends a powerful message to your students across the board of what you value. And I know in this district we value a lot of different things, science research, music, across the board. I can think of Hall of Fame, I can think of, you know, I'm not going to rattle names off, but we have students that have gone on in areas of dance, other things, been nationally recognized and done really well. They need to be held up as examples too. So I think as we look at this, what's really important to me is, what's the space we've designated? What's the size of the space we've designated? What groups have access to what? And are we basically making sure that you know, an array of students are being recognized? We have incredibly powerful students in the district in a lot of different fronts, even in non-conventional ways, right? So how are we finding ways to celebrate that and doing that with equity? I think that's the piece that's, you know, it's tough, and we get into the whole conversations about size, and, you know, for some you put up something huge, for some you put up something small. All of these things tie into the difficult conversations, right? I agree with the sentiments that the buildings need to be involved. I also think we need to push the thinking around memorials. I think we need to push them to really look at the research and see how it impacts kids. And then I think look at it more holistically across, how do we do this across the board? So that's my 2 cents.
There was something that Frank just said that I've been thinking, and I think the phrase that he used really helped solidify it for me, which is what we really want to be doing as a district is holding students up, all students, for a variety of reasons. So I would just challenge, you know, with some of the community input, challenge whether or not, if we're enacting a policy that in effect is limiting and not necessarily holding others up, maybe we need to challenge our thinking. And it's not, this isn't really a policy committee issue, but maybe we need to be engaging or encourage engagement of more outreach of, maybe it's a guidance counselor that nominates a student for a plaque on a wall in some area of the school, so that we can find more ways to lift more students up, so that there are more places within our buildings where every single student can walk down a hallway and say, that inspires me. And I get that that's not necessarily this policy in black and white, but I think that's sort of the sentiment that's driving some of these policy changes, and I think it's worth looking at that other aspect of it.
I'd have to, you know, agree with the fact that we should be recognizing a lot of different fields, but this policy specifically talks about removal, and I do not feel comfortable adopting a policy that talks about removing things we take pride in. So until, we can add something that talks about equity and talks about giving recognition to other groups, whether it's music or, the arts or drama or this and that. But when we start talking about removal, when space has yet to become an issue, I have concerns about that.
Thank you. Melissa?
I think there's a lot of valid points here tonight, and I appreciate everybody for coming out as well. And I think we definitely do need to explore the time limits that were put in here. But again, these are drafts. There's no decisions being made, and I think there's a lot of room for discussion to just determine what is the best course of action moving forward. And I think everyone would agree that the end goal is to make sure that we are representing all achievements, because there's different children from different walks of life that want something to look up to and say and aspire to. There's different pathways to success, achievement, and recognition. And so we're just trying to explore ways to make sure we're capturing that all in the best way. I would agree that you don't want to just start, that can have a visceral effect as well, understandably, just ripping stuff down off the wall. Of course, you don't want to adopt a policy that is not respecting the history of our district as much as we're trying to look forward to the future. So I definitely agree with, bringing in more perspectives to talk about how we move forward so that nobody feels like they're, not being heard in this process. That's definitely, I don't think anyone here would want to walk away feeling like we've left out a piece of this, when we're considering what is going to be the permanent adopted policy. So I just want to make sure that people realize that it's not, this is not like set in stone or anything like that, and we definitely do recognize that there's a lot of different variables to this, and that we do want all of our students to have pride, because pride in all that we are is literally just that. There's a lot of nuances in there, and we want to make sure we're addressing all of them.
So Dan, I'm surprised you got up for this one and didn't come up and say that you wanted a new gym for Ossining High School. You just stayed quiet during that whole process. I'm really actually surprised that you or Pat didn't talk and say, let's get up there and say that. Why one for Brookside and not Ossining High School? So I'll just put that out there as a, first of all, I just want to, thank Mr. Federico for being here. We had a conversation earlier on with Mr. Galiff per the policy committee to dialogue, and certainly wanted to make sure that you knew everything that was happening. And thank you for being here, and also for everything that you do to contribute and support our schools and our programs across the board for many years. And I want to thank everyone for their perspective. I think what Dan made reference to other people wanting to be here. I think their voice matters, right? But I also want to put perspective to that this doesn't have to be like coming through the walls and having to, this is about having a dialogue. I think what I hope comes across from here is there was a real intention on the part of the Board of Education to put this out there so that we can engage the way that we're doing right now. And some of the advice that's been shared is really, really important. Whether it's getting more stakeholder groups, perspectives on time, see if there's consensus around that and concerns about that. And I think I'm listening here as obviously a participant here at the board with the board, but everyone's pausing, right? I think there's no one's pushing through and saying tomorrow we're doing this. And I hope there's recognition even by those that aren't here to know that this was made public for that very reason, meaning that most policies, there's a lot of policies that impact our practices here, but this one we knew was going to resonate and wanted to make sure that there was discussions around this. I just hope to those that you talk to that there's an understanding and perspective that's shared along this. And I think, and I'll just use our personal conversations, that we've engaged in a lot of conversations about recognition. And I remember that one basketball game where I sat there and said, there's no more after this, and there were more. And that's all, what's that? And there'll be more and more accomplishments by our kids, right? There's going to continue, and our staff. Because, the truth is that there's some outstanding staff, and some have unfortunately passed. And we just recently had a conversation about, Bill Casey. and his passing, and there were a number of individuals that wanted to recognize and recognize his efforts and the impact that he had on the lives of children and staff. And that's a real challenge as a superintendent sitting here and the board. That's, I think, was a challenge. I think what we were looking for in policy is just have some consistency in the way that goes forward. We're not going to be here forever, and having some structure to that is that we can all agree upon, so that there's longevity to that. I think what a policy provides us. Because of the great things that happen. I mean, I'm often pulled, and I'm just saying it from my perspective, to share things, and I don't have anything to stand on, just hallway conversations or other things that happen, and there's really no procedure to it. And I would personally, and I think anyone that sits in the seat of superintendent or with the board should have some process, that it shouldn't be left to the superintendent and what he likes or doesn't like, but that there's always something we can go back to and hold on to. And I agree that the topic of memorials there's research around it, and I think there's dialogues to have it. And what is equity related to that? There are some passings that unfortunately happen, and crises that happen in our district, and how do we recognize all students that, or staff that unfortunate crisis happens with? So that's really what I wanted to share. I think, I think gratitude for those that came. I think the dialogue needs to continue. I think, Pat, you made reference to, just 'cause you're here, just, to the various institutions and how they recognize. I think that's kind of what we're trying to get at, is how do we recognize, Duke chose to have banners. Syracuse chose to put up Derek Coleman's number, right? How's that for some, right? My point is that there's different ways, and they've made choices as it, and we don't have to do it the way they did it, nor would I suggest we do it. We hear them, and then ultimately we do it the Ossining way, right? And what we feel is appropriate, because they're not putting pictures of their teams up. Because they chose a different way to recognize. So really, that's just the discussion. And that's why they're not pulling anything down, is number one, they have pride, but also there's a process to how they're making those decisions. You can think of the Yankee Stadium. Memorial Park doesn't have a lot of memorials. There's a lot of great Yankees. Albeit as a Yankee fan, I feel like they've started to do a couple more than I thought. That's just my own perspective. I won't go too much into the Yankees, but my point being is that there's a lot of great, they have a process too. And I think the questions around Hall of Fame, I'm pausing too, just think about that. It shouldn't be left to the individuals. Is it because of Josh and who was the other person? Ronnie Cunningham. It was left to two people, right? So now two people leave the district, and there's, what's our process now? Does it mean that we don't have a Hall of Fame because of two individuals? My point being is that it needs to go beyond just two people, right? You know what I?
In the state Hall of Fame, county Hall of Fame, I'm not in the
And I pause too, I'm just saying it out loud in front of you. I wonder about the museum being the space, right? Because if we really want to have pride, our kids don't get a chance to see who's in the Hall of Fame. That Hall of Fame, that room, the museum, albeit it's a museum, isn't a space that a lot of kids get to see. So if it really is about pride and recognition about our history, it makes us pause really as an institution of learning. How do we get the pride and get our students to understand the real history that exists here, the rich history that you both have gone through, right, as graduates of Ossining High School? It's just making me question a little bit right now, and it's something that I think Frank is alluding to, as well as how do we make sure there's equity around any recognition that takes place, and no matter what the Hall of Fame is. So further discussions? No, I don't think we are going to get consensus here. And your input is important, but I just want to put perspective to this, as a whole, and it's really important. And before we go to judge, and I would just say not the individuals here, but just anyone, that, we just pause to ask the questions, like what's the thinking, what's the thought on it, so that, we can come and have productive conversations around any decisions. I know the one that you made reference to earlier, and it was a difficult conversation for this entire community, right? this isn't that. And we're trying to have a discussion and have an open dialogue about it, so that's it. Leave it
Okay,
there.
all right. I'm going to take a motion to table Resolution 4.7.
So moved.
All in favor? Aye. Okay, Resolution 4.7 will go back to committee and further on, so thank you very much. Thanks. Thank you, Mr. Federico. Thanks. Okay. We're going to move into our regular meeting, business of the board. We are going to, do we need to pull, to move up 4.4 and 4.5? Should
Definitely separate them, if nothing else.
separate them?
I would table those because West Putt's got its meeting this week, and we'll go through it. We can send back the summary, and I think this can take the whole night, and we
Okay.
don't want it to take the whole night.
Yeah, should we
Do
do
we have
the
enough
delegate,
time?
should we do the
We should do
delegate
at
piece
least
or
the
just wait?
delegate. I think we should at least do, yeah, I think we should at
don't
least
know.
do the delegate.
Yeah.
That's not going to be, okay. So I'm going to leave that, so I'm going to take a motion to table 4.5.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. So we can move up, I'm going to take a motion to move up 4.4.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. So,
You just moved it up. You want to vote on it?
okay, now we're going to
Just take a
vote.
motion to vote on it, just procedurally.
Okay, so we'll take a motion to vote on Resolution 4.4.
So moved.
Second.
You should just read it. You should read it.
Okay. And Resolution 4.4 is to appoint the voting delegate and alternate at the New York State School Boards Association Annual Business Meeting. Any discussion?
So
Who's
who's going to be
going?
the delegate?
Who's,
I'm going.
and we can nominate, right? We can,
Well, I think you will
Let's just-
nominate whoever's going. I mean, first start with who's going
Yeah,
to go.
who's
Who's
going?
going?
I have to, I will be there.
I'll be there, Melissa Banta will be there, Frank Schnecker will be there,
I'm looking into my.
Catherine Crossland may or may not be there, Greg Rochester this year, not this year, Diana, Aaron. Okay, so out of the three of us,
So what it means is having to stay on Saturday morning. So if you're looking to get out of there, you know, you're going to be there for half the day. So I'm happy for someone else to be the delegate, but I'm going to be there anyhow. So it's up to you if you want to participate in the process and vote. That's fine.
And it
I
doesn't
can be the
mean you
backup.
can't go to the meeting and see, it's kind of an interesting meeting. It just means you're not the one who raises
Right,
the
You
paddle.
don't get the paddle.
Basically, we're going to decide whether you're going to raise the paddle, yes or no, and then whoever the delegate is the one who actually executes the yes or no.
So I don't mind being a backup if somebody else wants to do it.
I would, I think trustee Schnecker, I have all the faith in you to be our delegate, and Melissa, if you'd like to be our alternate delegate, that would be great. So
Are you planning on attending the business meeting or not?
Yeah, I'll attend, but I'm fine with you being the...
No, I always recommend we have Melissa be the voting delegate, and I'll be the backup. And if you decide you don't want to, then I can just take it, if that's all right.
Good. All right, then, all right, so Melissa Morris Banta will be our delegate, and Frank Schnecker will be our alternate. And I could be the alternate. Anyway, all right, so if there's no more conversation, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Okay. All right, I will take a motion for resolutions 4.1, 4.2, 4.3, 4.6, and 4.8.
Second.
Okay, 4.1 is a resolution to appoint additional consultants for the 2019-2020 school year. Resolution 4.2 is a resolution to approve an agreement with the Ossining Association of Administrators and Supervisors. 4.3 is a resolution to approve the minutes of the regular meeting of August 20th. Resolution 4.6 is a resolution to approve an agreement with Shaw, Perelson, May, and Lambert LLP. Perelson, sorry. And Resolution 4.8 is a resolution to adopt the following policies as a first reading, which the policies are 5605, voter registration for students, and 6240-R, investment regulations. Any discussions? Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Okay. Okay, moving into our curriculum and instruction, I take a motion for Resolution 5.1.
So moved.
Second.
Resolution 5.1, resolution to accept recommended placements. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Okay. Moving into business office matters. I'd like to take a motion for Resolution 6.1 through 6.6.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor? Oh, I'm sorry, I have to read it, sorry. 6.1, resolution regarding increase in budget, driver education program. 6.2, resolution regarding appointment of consultant, driver's education program. 6.3, resolution regarding disposal of computer equipment, the Ossining School District. 6.4, resolution regarding increase in budget, Network for Good, Inc., Ossining High School. 6.5, resolution regarding increase in budget for lost textbooks, Ossining High School. And Resolution 6.6, resolution regarding interfund transfers. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Okay. Moving into personnel matters. I'd like to take a motion for Resolution 7.1 through 7.14.
So moved.
Second.
Okay. Resolution 7.1, resolution regarding civil service staff resignations. 7.2, resolution regarding support staff resignations. 7.3, resolution regarding bus attendant resignations. 7.4, resolution regarding an administrative staff appointment. 7.5, resolution regarding professional staff appointments. 7.6, resolution regarding civil service staff appointments. 7.7, resolution regarding support staff appointments. 7.8, resolution regarding bus attendant appointments. 7.9, resolution regarding professional staff appointments for before and after school programs. 7.10, resolution regarding civil service staff appointments before and after school programs. 7.11, resolution regarding support staff appointments before and after school programs. 7.12, resolution regarding per diem substitute removals. 7.13, resolution regarding per diem substitute appointments. 7.14, resolution regarding approval of school volunteers. I'd like to thank all of always our volunteers for helping us any way they can. I'd like to recognize them. And I'd like to open up if there's any discussion. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Okay. Audience recognition? Please come to the mic and say your name.
I think it's for information only.
Your address, and welcome.
Hi, my name is Myrna Forney, and I live in Ossining. One comment, I don't know, I know that Dexter's usually at the door, but there was no one there today, and I only luckily got in the building because the door to the gym was open, and I could come in that way. So you guys on Board of Education nights, if you could find a way to make sure that there's an entrance open, because people who want to come late or have to come late need to be able to get in the building.
Was the door all the way on the left locked?
All of the doors were locked.
On the left? Interesting.
Absolutely every door.
And when I came in, the left door was open. Okay.
Yeah, so, there were cars in the parking lot. I hoped you guys were here.
I assure you it wasn't on purpose.
No, I know, I'm just making a comment so that, you know,
Good, thank you.
so that people
We don't
can
know
get
these
in.
things, yeah.
I have been in this district for way too many years now. I'm not originally from Ossining, but I have often come to express my concerns. I've had many fruitful and less than fruitful conversations about many things in this building and in this school district. One of the things that is of repeated concern is the curriculum and its incorporation of African American history, and also our curriculum and the idea that many years later, after being out of high school, still have my children in high school reading the same books that I read. In over 20-plus years, there have been many Nobel Prize winning authors, many authors of many races and ethnicities, excuse me, not races, but ethnicities. And I think that there should be a deeper look at our curriculum and how we incorporate other people's history into that. And I understand the way that our textbooks are written and driven. I also understand that now we're not necessarily using the traditional textbooks. So I would ask this district to make a very, very, very deep effort to look at what we're asking our children to learn from pre-K through high school graduation. To that end, assuming some of you may be aware of the New York Times 1619 project. If you're not, I encourage you to listen to the podcasts and to look at and read the various episodes, or I don't know what they're called, series, the entire series. It is a series about the history of slavery in America. In August, it was the 400-year anniversary of when slavery began. Along with it, they put in a lot of time and they developed a free curriculum that can be incorporated into our system that talks truly about what slavery meant and what's its impact through today. There's that kind of curriculum that's available to this district. There are number upon number of books written by African Americans, Latinx, Asians. We are rich with culture, and I don't think that we have to rely on the same old throwbacks. I think it's kind of a lazy way to address curriculum, and I'm not saying that it's your. I don't mean to be disrespectful or mean about it, but I'm tired of having the same conversation. And I've been engaged in this conversation in this district since long before Ray was here. I've been engaged in it before Stephen Hancock was here, before in the middle school, before, when Regina was there. And I really do think and charge you guys and challenge you guys to really look at what you're teaching our children, and to look at how we are not including the history of other people in what they're learning. And I really challenge the board to challenge the administration to come up with a better way to educate our children so that in 2021, in 21-22, when kids are coming through here, they're enriched and engaged in a way that maybe other communities are not. Part of the reason my husband and I bought our home in this community was because of diversity. But there's not diversity represented in the education they're receiving, and there should be thought to that. So that's my challenge. I will be back again and again and again because I think this change needs to happen.
Thank you. Okay, board discussion, any other discussion of any committees or any other information that anyone wants to share?
Yeah, I have a few things. One, attended the PTA meeting last Monday, PTA Council. I want to thank them. They were at every single back-to-school night fundraising, and they do so much for our community. And they're having the little free libraries this Friday at 4 p.m. is the kickoff of that. Again, this is a volunteer-run organization. They do so much for our kids, so much for our community, and it's important that we recognize them. A couple other things I'd like to bring up is if we could possibly look into starting a subcommittee for advocacy for dyslexia funding from the state. I'd be happy to chair such committee and find parents that would be interested in being involved in this. I already know a few. I think, again, this is a learning disorder that affects 1 in 5 children throughout the United States, and other states have passed universal screening for dyslexia and funding for universal screening for dyslexia in kindergarten. So I think our district should look into an advocacy group that partners, that doesn't represent the district, but kind of reports back and says what's going on so that we can tackle this issue. Another thing, a lot of parents, taxpayers, even students have come up to me and talked about, we haven't done a verification process in years. Is this something that we want to look into, investigate, and possibly talk about doing again? And by verification process, I mean implement a program or a check to make sure people actually have residency status in Ossining. Again, hasn't happened in years. Something I'm asked almost every single day of the week about what are we doing about it. So just wanted to bring that up.
So we want to bring up what we did last time, the verification process?
Yeah, well, I mean, I can speak to what we did, and, to this broader discussion, I'm not sure we're going to conclude tonight, but you're right, I forget what year it was. It was a number of years ago. There was a 2-year process where basically I think it was every odd grade was brought forth. So if you were in first grade, you had to re-register, third grade. So the idea was over 2 years, you would get every family. It wasn't an inexpensive process from not only just dollars and cents, but also time of staff. And not taking away, and in some cases taking away from other duties that otherwise individuals are working on. That aside, we understand the importance of verification, that residency is important, and we have a lot of systems in place to seek to address that. So you and I were at a meeting with Facebook leaders, right? That was and this topic came up. And more often than not, there's a sense, and sometimes maybe because of enrollment, that there's feeling there's a lot of students that don't live here. But we follow through every single process. We verify everything that needs to be done, and if we hear something, we follow up on it as well. So that's just a general, historical piece, and it didn't yield a lot. That's a real important piece. So it was a 2-year, very expensive process, and it didn't yield anything tangible. So, and there are some districts that have embarked on that, and I haven't spoken to them, but I'd probably say that they didn't yield very much for them either. So, I hear it, I hear the same things, maybe it's even the same individuals talking to me and you. But I would just have a broader perspective of that in terms of in the context of putting the money into something that didn't necessarily lead to, we've tried it. It didn't work for us.
How long ago, do you know, was the exact year?
It's hard for me to say. I mean, some of us...
I think it has to be at least 8 years.
At least 8 years.
Yeah, it would have been around 2010 timeframe would have been the tail end of it, yeah.
So Dr. White was still in staff, and she helped
But people that
facilitate
come
a lot.
into the district, everyone's residency is checked, right, when they're entering the district, right? And so, I think that's just important to note, too. And when we receive reports, we investigate them thoroughly. And so if somebody has, a lot of times you hear things and I hear things, and I'll ask for specifics or email the board specifics, we'll investigate it. And sometimes we get follow-ups and sometimes we don't. So I would encourage, if you're speaking to anybody that has firsthand knowledge of a situation, they can email the board and, they can send an anonymous letter if they want to. It's not the way I would approach it, but, we do actively investigate those requests.
We can talk more about it.
Sounds good. I just wanted to, discuss it further in the future. I know it's late tonight, but this is probably number one issue being brought up for whatever reason whenever I talk to people. It's the number one issue brought up, and after 8 years, it might be time to reinvestigate. But I just wanted to bring that up so we can have a, discussion on it at some point and weigh the pros and the cons. And at the end of the day, we're here to educate kids, and that's our primary purpose. And we also have to, have due diligence to the taxpayer. So it's just something I wanted to bring up for future conversation.
So I think those conversations, if I could add, and I'm sure is an opportunity to educate too, meaning that explaining the history, our process, when we did it, cost associated with it, time associated with it, and the net associated with it as well, which was, and not everyone that comes to you and approaches us knows those facts. So, of course, and then thereafter we can engage. But to your point, if the board chooses to want to talk about it, then certainly chat about it.
Thank you.
I think maybe that's the two things. I mean, one, right, I'm hearing the same things. I think, right, it's been a long time, I know I've been doing enough of these conversations. It didn't yield much, and it may not yield. I think what we need to figure out is whether the sort of the goodwill of doing it could either, maybe we, surprise, not the word, but you might yield more than we did before, or we may not yield anything, but either way, and we have a process where essentially you could start in kindergarten and go through high school without, you verified once and didn't verify again. So, and it may be worth paying attention to some of the other districts who are doing it more recently to see if something about the times have changed, that there's more yield or no yield. That was one. I guess, I'd follow up on Myrna's question, just ask either for an update from you guys and maybe to Myrna, and if you have questions about what she's hearing, how to find her. But it was a topic that was a very prevalent topic 2, 3, 4 years ago. We talked about it a lot, and I have a feeling that we made changes and have done things, but we haven't talked about it as much in the last year or two. So I'd be sort of curious on how are we feeling in that area and what's going on. And
I felt like there was an awkward silence after Myrna left and we didn't respond to you. So, and I appreciate and I appreciate the questions, and they're important questions. Obviously, one that we philosophically agree with, and no, it's not the first time you've brought it up in a variety of settings. I think, first of all, it starts with the fact that, and we should remember, there's an equity committee that was formed a number of years ago. Banta sits on it, Dr. Alm, Ms. Sipos, with various stakeholders, including students, to come up with set of recommendations. Thereafter, there have been existing building equity committees. And the conversation, even during that time, was, do you go to the literature and the curriculum, or do you start going with beliefs of individuals and move forward and start changing some of that? I think we've taken two tactics to it. I know Ms. Sipos and the team in the elementaries have really worked hard to build culturally rich libraries. That's been intentional. We've invested a lot of dollars and resources appropriately, not only to have volume, but also from the perspective of making sure that various cultures are represented, and actually, anecdotally, the kids are really enjoying it. Right? We've seen just a even greater passion for some of the texts, and arguably because they're seeing themselves in the text, and there's just a diversity of the literature. We're familiar with the 1619, New York Times. I heard the podcast, and it's come up. We haven't necessarily sought to implement it just yet, but I know Dr. Alm is working with, an organization called Facing History, and that's really trying to bring about, bringing different perspectives to our history classes, and that's middle school and high school. And yet, we have looked at our English texts, and I'm not going to sit here and say that they're perfect and not worth re-looking at, but they have been reviewed in the past. And honestly, I think even last year, our student equity committee members have expressed and pushed at some of the thinking as well, relative to some of the texts that we're using. So all that to say is, I mean, later on, I think it's in maybe, I just looked at this calendar, the equity, we're going to provide an equity update. I'm happy to reach out to you so in a proactive manner, and if you can't, at least minimum send you the videos to provide a formal report to the board about what's happening in terms of professional development, but also from the lens of curriculum and instruction. But I want to share with the board, it's not that there is a lot of work that is taking place, but certainly we have work to do. We really do. But we've taken it on. We're having, challenging conversations with each other. Our children are leading professional development, which is,
powerful at the high school.
It's powerful, right? Year 1, year 2 is better than year 1. To build a culture where our kids are, speaking very honestly about some of their experiences. So, we're a work in progress. We're always going to be. But I want to share with you that on many levels we've taken it, very seriously, and it's a focus of our learning too, and from an administrative perspective, and also with our building teams as well. So, kind of want that's just on the brief, but more formal when we provide an equity update, we'll provide this through a culturally responsive lens as well, and give you a sense of some of the concrete efforts that have been put in, and one as a status report to the recommendations, but also the things that have taken place.
Come on back.
And I just want to make, I do recognize, and I've seen in the elementary libraries and in the middle school library, I've seen the change. That's not necessarily my point. There's a difference between the mandatory education, what's actually required of everyone, and the elective education, right? So that we have more books available in the libraries is fantastic. I'm not downplaying that. That you still are required mandatorily to read a colonial history of America with regard to everything that leaves out many portions of America. That's where it really, the rubber hits the road, right? It's really about not what you're elected to read, like, okay, so the whole class is reading, Huck Finn, and then everybody else can pick from all of these great books. Well, yeah, but the whole class still read Huck Finn. So if we're going to look at the mandatory, and when I say mandatory, what everyone does versus what people get to elect, I think that's where the real education of our children comes into play. And that's what I'm talking about. So I know, and I am watching, and I'm aware of a lot of the changes. But when we're talking about what really matters to me, and that's that everybody is exposed to everyone, that's not what happened. That still is very traditional in our school system. So that's what I'm talking about.
Thank you. Melissa?
No, I just wanted to, kind of comment on that. I would certainly agree that there is, and I think the end goal of the Equity Committee is to find ways for us to make sure that these shifts are part of the fabric of the school district and not just electives. And, it is a lot of steps to that, but it is a necessary step. I would agree that moving forward, that is the goal, is to try to find ways to make the curriculum more diverse, as opposed to just the singularity of diversity within the scope of the whole district. So I definitely, want to make sure that you understand your voice is definitely heard, and other people's voices who do have the same sentiments in that regard, because it is a very integral part of history, American history specifically, and it makes sense to make sure we're giving our children a well-rounded education in that regard.
We had an advocacy meeting, committee meeting, and that was last night. So we met with some of the folks from Ossining for Fair Funding and discussed in general what this next year is going to look like, what our goals are, with a hefty dose of thank you to the community members that were so instrumental in leading the charge last year. That was in many ways extremely successful, I think beyond what any of us sitting here this time last year thought was going to happen. So it was really nice to see them again. I don't know if it's really worth it this time, outlining everything specifically that we went through, but there is a plan to meet with various folks who are involved in working on foundation aid to make sure that Ossining's story still is very much out there, and the story with the other school districts that we paired up with is still very much in the forefront of everyone's mind. I think that everyone is in agreement that Ossining as a school district will do a fantastic job of educating children, all children, taking input, very important input from community members, and trying our best to listen to the community and make sure that every single student is educated well in a great environment every single day, but also being mindful of the fact that we are not being treated equitably by the state, and by a long shot, and the goal of this next year is to make sure that they are reminded of that and kind of put together a strategy for how we continue to stay relevant with our story. So there are some future meetings scheduled with that. I'll certainly let Frank and Dr. Sanchez talk more about that if they want to. I did just want to echo Erin's sentiment. I've been to a lot of back to schools, community events, some school-related, some not. I would say at every single one of those, I've been approached by more than one community member about registration of students. I have used it as an opportunity to correct some of the misinformation and some of the conflation of issues in our village and town that really have nothing to do with the schools and whether or not we should be educating students. But it seems to have come up significantly more than it ever has before. I think it would be helpful to have some talking points, such as when it was last done, how much it cost, what it yielded, to aid in that conversation. And then, it might be, it's a concern enough to enough of the community that they do want to see the school board discussing it. So I think getting that into this discussion in the future is probably something we should think about.
Well, I'll just add that in relation to advocacy, there's upcoming forums taking place. Shelley Mayer, we should all be aware, is looking at the foundation aid formula. She's holding 2 rounds. Well, I'm referencing 2 because one in Westchester, one in Long Island, but throughout the state.
5 across the state.
5 across the state. That's not an open forum in terms of just individuals having mic time. It's a round table of, I'm hearing around 25 members coming to the table and sharing perspectives on more to come on
Will the
that.
governor be there?
I'm sorry?
I said, will the governor be there?
I highly doubt it.
So that's Senator Shelley Mayer, who's the education chair. So yeah, so Ray, you're going to be at the one in October, I believe?
If I'm invited.
Okay. Hope you
We don't know who's on the invited list yet, so to be determined, to be continued.
known to, okay. All right, great.
Discussion, but it's open to the public.
Open to the public, but not an open mic where
Okay.
all the previous type of sessions they've had where they're asking for feedback.
Okay.
I think it's October 16th, if it comes to mind.
Okay, great. All right, thank you. And I just want to say I'm having so much fun with the summer reading buddies. That's become now the fall reading buddies, and my group is started with 2 4th graders, is now growing. I have a feeling this coming week we'll be adding more people. So we're reading graphic novels and writing graphic novels. So it's been a lot of fun for me. That's one. There you go.
Kafka's Metamorphosis, a graphic novel.
And
I just found it tonight.
That's great. And we're all able to tell our stories as we're writing the graphic novels. So that's been a really great inspiration for me, and the students have been awesome. So just wanted to share that. And Greg?
Which just made me think the MBK mentoring program is recruiting for additional mentors for this year. We probably had 15 or so, 10 to 15 last year. It's a great program. I confirmed today they're current focus is on male mentors. They'll work towards female mentors in the future, but, so if anybody knows, I think, it sounds like it's most likely going to be Wednesdays at 4 twice a month. Don't have to be there every single time, but it's a nice thing to think about. Aaron?
I think
You're doing enough. You're doing more than enough, I know.
Kids in MBK, so I consider that mentoring on.
You're doing more than enough.
Aspect.
You should think about, yeah, we should think about other people.
But
that,
I'll think about some people.
you know, you can be a guest. You could just show up whenever you feel like it.
All right. Anything else?
Yeah, I do. We should have probably started the board meeting with a moment of silence. I just wanted to, we had some sad news this week. We had Dave Richards, who's a Ossining High School custodian, pass away. He served the district since 2015 and was a key member of our staff here. We've all seen Dave in our passing here, particularly in the late evening. So just, if you wouldn't mind joining me in a moment of silence for Dave and recognition for his passing. Thank you. And obviously our thoughts are with his family and with our staff as well.
All right. Take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?